Welcome, friends. It's good to be gathered with you all for this second day of our Quaker Theological Discussion Group 2025. My name is Charisse Bach, and I am out on the west coast of the United States in Oregon, and glad to be able to convene this space today. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Quaker Theological Discussion Group, along with Christy Randazzo, and we have some other members of our QTDG committee who are here with us this morning, Mark Russ, Wendy Cooler, and Welling Hall. So appreciate them joining the team this year and strengthening our Quaker Theological Discussion Group as a little bit of a committee. So this morning, we are going to be continuing our discussion this year of Quaker public ministry, history, practice, and challenges. And yesterday we kind of covered the historical part with some great panelists sharing about historical aspects of Quaker public ministry and ministry in different places and through different people's understanding and practice. And so today is more of a modern understanding and considering what does Quaker public ministry look like today. So it's exciting to have some great panelists with us this morning. So we will be hearing this morning from, or whatever time of day it is, it's morning for me, but maybe afternoon or evening where you are. But today we will be hearing from Ashley Wilcox, John Muhanji, Myron Guachalla, Montano, and Wendy Cooler. And so I'll read their bios now, and then as I introduce each of them, I'll share with you their presentation topic. So Ashley M. Wilcox is a Quaker minister and the best-selling author of the Women's Lectionary, Preaching the Women of the Bible Throughout the Year. She currently serves as the executive director of Public Friends, a new nonprofit founded to support Quaker ministry. Ashley preaches, teaches, and speaks across the United States and internationally. Her writing has been featured in the New York Times, G's, Friends Journal, Quaker Religious Thought, and numerous Quaker anthologies. And we'll share out her website, ashleymwilcox.com. John Muhanji is a respected Quaker theologian, educator, and intercultural dialogue advocate with decades of experience bridging faith and culture across continents. He serves as the director of the Africa Ministries Office for Friends United meeting, where he's played a pivotal role in shaping and expanding Quaker witness in Africa. Dr. Muhanji earned his Master of Divinity from Earlham School of Religion in Richmond, Indiana, and his Doctor of Ministry from George Fox University in Portland, Oregon. He's also the co-author with Eloise Hockett of Lessons Learned on Cross-Cultural Ministry, a reflective and practical guide to faith-based intercultural engagement. His deep engagement with African spirituality and extensive work with local Quaker communities inform his nuanced perspective on contextual theology. In Rooted and Reimagined, a new book coming out soon, Muhanji presents a pioneering exploration of how Quaker thought can take root and flourish within African cultural and spiritual realities, challenging assumptions and opening new avenues for faith in action. And third, Myron Guachalla, originally from Bolivia, is a sojourning member of West Richmond Friends Church in Richmond, Indiana. He served on the Friends World Committee for Consultation for several years. Originally from Bolivia, Myron is passionate about bridge building, which led him to help establish the World Executive Committee of Young Adult Friends, an organization that remains active today. Currently, Myron is pursuing a career in ministry and attends Earlham School of Religion. And finally, Wendy Cooler is a practical theologian, embraced public minister, and convener of the Friends Incubator for Public Ministry, an experimental grassroots collaborative that accompanies ministers and worshiping communities in discovering their own wisdom as they renew, celebrate, and deepen accountability in the practice of Friends ministries. Opportunities for engagement with the Friends Incubator can be found at friendsincubator.org, and we'll also share that website. So As we have these wonderful friends joining us this morning, we will hear each of their presentations. You can send questions to Mark Russ in the chat, who will collect them, and then we will ask them so that they aren't kind of distracting in the chat during the person speaking. Just please share them with Mark, and we'll use those for our discussion time. So we're going to have Ashley go first. We're going to actually have all of the question and answer time for Ashley right after she speaks, as she's going to have to head out after that. But then for the rest of the speakers, we will have their presentation, ask them one question, and then hear the other presentations and do more of a discussion, question and answer time at the end. So please don't forget to send questions to Mark Russ as they occur to you throughout these panelists sharing. He put his name in the chat there so you can find him easily. And we will have a great discussion time. Also at the end today, we will have a brief business meeting to share about Quaker Theological Discussion Group and to have opportunities for you all to make suggestions for topics for the future and anything else that you want to communicate to QTDG. So make sure to stick around for that. All right, so without further ado, we're going to start with Ashley, and appreciate Ashley being here and sharing with us on the topic, a new recording process for the 21st century. Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks, Charisse, and thanks to everyone who's organizing this. So good to see so many familiar names and faces, and some of you were involved in this project, so I appreciate that. A new recording process for the 21st century. Why this? Why is this something that I thought was important to do and to talk about? To explain that, I want to talk briefly about Public Friends and what we're doing in that organization. The mission of Public Friends is to ensure the future of Friends in North America by supporting and developing Quaker ministers to a professional standard. And the main thing is we believe that Public Friends need support and accountability, much more so than we have had recently. And one of the ways to provide that support and accountability is by having a recording process for them that is comprehensive, that meetings can use, and that provides guidance for meetings and individuals at every step of the way. So this was a big project, and one of the reasons I took this on is because I believe that the lack of a consistent and clear recording process is harming ministers, and especially women and queer people. I am a queer woman. I was recorded as a minister in 2013, and that was really unlikely given the current landscape of recording in the United States. And so I wanted to make something that I wish I'd had when I was going through that process. And the reason that this has this disproportionate impact on women and queer people in the US is that yearly meetings that are actively doing recording tend to be more politically and theologically conservative here, and the meetings that are more liberal are less likely to record. And so I wanted to give tools for people who wanted to do this that don't have the practice in their yearly meeting. This project was supported by a grant from the Louisville Institute. So here was the process. Researchers and I collected as many recording processes as we could find. We looked at 40 yearly meetings in the US, and out of that, we found 16 that record on the yearly meeting level, four that record by monthly meeting, 13 yearly meetings that do not record, and the remaining we were not able to find. So that was seven yearly meetings. Once we had gathered that information, I put everything into a document, sorting into categories, and that document was 130 pages long. We have so much out there that is available, but these yearly meetings are not talking to each other necessarily. And I actually started the first process I looked at was Eastern region, which is probably the most politically conservative, and I would say in some ways the farthest from my own faith and practice, but they have an excellent comprehensive recording process. And so that was a good place to start. So I gathered all this information and sorted it, and then went about writing a recording process. And one of the things that I found was that recording processes tended to go astray from um, recording the minister to rescinding the recording without anything in between. And we need a lot more support than that and ways to hold ministers accountable before just taking away a recording. And so the recording process I drafted had sections on support and accountability, the responsibilities of the minister, the responsibilities of the meetings, and what to do when a minister engages in unethical or harmful behavior, which many of us have seen in yearly meetings. And we don't always have good guidance on how to address that. I also saw recording processes where people went straight from rescinding the recording to reinstating the recording for ministers who had engaged in bad behavior. And that is just not a healthy way to go about this. We have seen really troubling examples of that. So, those were some of the major gaps that I saw and was trying to address. After drafting this recording process, which I think Sharice or Mark will share in the chat, it's available for free online for anyone to use and download. So after the initial draft, I sent it out to first readers, and there are at least two on the Zoom. So thank you for your service in this. And I asked these readers to comment in a Google Doc with questions, concerns, what was missing, what they thought should be included. And it was really a beautiful process of eight friends, I believe, from different yearly meetings, and one Methodist. And the Methodist, after reading it, said that he was envious of the ways that we do discernment and having discernment in community and with people that we know. He had a very different experience with his ordination process. So I gathered all that feedback, all those questions, and went back to drafting. And this is kind of funny. the place that was most controversial in the recording process that I had drafted was whether to have a celebration after the person was recorded. Some people, this is part of their practice and seems obvious. Others, it just seems like not what Quakers do. So that was kind of funny to me. You never know what's going to be most controversial, and that was the thing here. So I took all that feedback, incorporated it. I did not make all the changes, and some of them were kind of opposed to each other, and that's just how Quakers are and how recording processes are. They vary from yearly meeting to yearly meeting, especially in places where there are pastors or where there are not. And so I was trying to take the broadest approach to this. So once that was all incorporated, it went on the website and out into the world. And my hope is that meetings and yearly meetings will take this, they will adapt it for their own context, take what is useful, leave what isn't, and that we will have more resources for ministers going forward.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for sharing about your process and uh, for doing this great work for Friends. I'll just get us started off with a question, and then again, if folks have questions for Ashley, please send them to Mark Russ in the chat. So, Ashley, maybe not all friends from every types of Quaker branches understand why recording is important. So maybe give a little explanation of like what is it that's useful about the recording process, since friends have famously not ordained people, but what is it that's useful to the minister themselves and to the yearly meeting and the friends community, the broader community about recording?
Thanks, Sharice. So, recording is important for a number of reasons. It is a historical practice among Friends and one that I think has had more teeth at times. And so some yearly meetings laid this down because they thought it was creating a different class of people within Friends. But really, at its best, it is a way for meetings to name the gifts of people in their meetings that they see doing public ministry, which may be mostly within the meeting itself or entirely in some cases, but often is beyond that. And so that is a way for meetings to say, we know this person, we support their ministry, they have our support in going out and speaking, and we will hold them accountable for what they do and say in the world. And I think that is just essential for the kind of organization we have where anyone can go out and say anything on behalf of Friends. And I think being grounded in a meeting and having that kind of oversight is really important for ministers. It is also important for people who work ecumenically. I know many people who are parts of groups or professionally where everyone else is ordained and they don't have that kind of credential, which may not mean as much to Friends, but does mean a lot to the other people from other denominations. So this is really helpful for people who are working in the wider world.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful, and being able to, especially in, as was put in the chat, that when you need a professional license, that's really helpful if you want to be a chaplain in a hospital or a prison or places like that. That can be really helpful. As this process has gotten started in your organization, are there things that people have mentioned as most useful and impactful about this process? What kind of support and accountability processes have public ministers who have gone through the recording process that you're suggesting found to be most impactful or most helpful in their practice?
So one of the places I've seen people using it is in support and accountability committees. And there's a section on that within the process. There's a clearness committee section and then a anchoring committee section. And for so many people who are doing public ministry, they are the ones who have to tell their support committee what to do. And so it's kind of backseat driving. And so having a process of here are the ways to gather, here are the questions to ask, here's the process of having these meetings is really helpful for people who are organizing or clerking them and for the ministers themselves.
Great, thank you. And one more question is from a friend who is part of a yearly meeting that does not have a recording process and wondering how meetings without a recording process support financially or in other ways friends in maybe their young adult years who have a gift of ministry.
That's a great question. And financial support is such a part of this. Meetings, if they're saying they're supporting ministers, financial support needs to be a part of that. So I think having ways to collect funds to support people that people in the meeting could give to the meeting because meetings are often 501c3s, and that's important for donors to be able to get that uh, designation and making that available to young people, saying that it's available, pointing out their gifts, mentoring them, giving them time, attention, and guidance in what to do because we're gonna lose our young people if we don't tell them that we see them and their gifts and support them financially, spiritually, and emotionally.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being with us and doing this important work among friends.
Thank you.
And next, we will be hearing from John Muhanji, and we get to hear from him on the topic Reimagining Quaker Public Ministry in the African Context, a Christ Woven Witness. So, John, please.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank you and I appreciate this forum for inviting and accepting to listen to my presentation, which is coming from a different perspective and a new way of public ministry. A topic is here is reimagining Quaker public ministry in African context. A Christ-woven witness, and this is an African context one. This submission presents a theological work titled Reimagining the Quaker work. Yesterday, we were looking at that Quaker history, and I think I was glad to listen to especially listening to Steve Angel and also listening to the Mark who was speaking about the Ghani ministry. That is how bringing out the historical, and that is what we are now talking about, this reimagining Quaker ministry within the African context. Friends, my ministry and witness are rooted in their role as a friends among friends in East Africa and Central Africa, particularly among the Luhya Western Kenya, where Quakerism is active and evolving as a social religious movement. In Africa, Quaker public ministry is not being transplanted as a ready-made or imported ministry from Western models of church and religious leadership. Instead, it is developed from soil, woven into the fabric of life as it already exists, a faith rooted in the field and farms, worship gatherings, peace-building activities, rites of passage, and social services where Christ is not only spoken, but present. African Quaker public ministry is Christ-woven, incarnated in indigenous wisdom and African cultural or communal life, and guided by attention of the leading of the Spirit. But looking at this from various perspectives, on the first part of this is the Quaker public ministry in historical and theological context in the African settings. Quakerism arrived in Kenya and East Africa during the first half of the 20th century through the effort of Friends African Mission and later Friends United Meeting. Although Western missionaries introduced the Quaker faith, it took root in African soil. Gospel truth intertwined the rhythm of the African community and storytelling, fostering spiritual power and liberating hope. For instance, in Kenya, public ministry evolved rapidly, not only as formal preaching, but as embodying faith in tangible public ways. African theology recognizes and integrates indigenous African cosmologies and perceptions of the sacred, including the understanding that God is present in all aspects of life. As a result, many African cultures, like early Quakers, are monotheistic and receptive to hearing God's Spirit, but also inherently believe that God is active in the world, speaking through dreams, elders, the creation and order of the universe, as well as the mysteries of illness and pain. Quaker public ministry in Africa thus emerged as a natural blend of being spirit-led and Christ-centered, while also being culturally rooted and distinctly Africa in its communal expression. The second part is the Christ-woven witness, the ministry embodied in daily life. In an African context, Christ-woven ministry signifies a public witness of Christ that is interwoven with the very fabric of everyday life. In the villages of the Luhya of Western Kenya, the public witness of Christ is most visible and active, not on pulpits or formal institutions, but in the following places. One, the market, where Christian women sing spiritual choruses while selling vegetables, greet and encourage customers, and offer young girls advice on maintaining their moral integrity. Two, at the well, where groups of women and girls gather in conversation as they draw water and use the time to encourage one another, pray for challenges, and bear each other's burden while they're drawing water from the well or from the springs to their homes. Number three, the shamba, that is the farm, where mothers and grandmothers weed maize and or gathered beans and converse about scripture or life testimonies, often bursting into songs of praise and thanksgiving in their what we call the Isuka, one of the communities, or the Marama dialects or the Maragori dialects, where they're enjoying and feeling their harvest and enjoying to do that work on the farm. It is a public ministry. Four, the rites of passage, such as the circumcision ceremony for young men, and where church elders reinterpret traditional practices in light of Christ's teachings, offering practical guidance and mentorship from those grounded in spiritual maturity and communal care. Five, community barazas, which is gatherings, where friends are often invited to lead peace buildings and conflict resolutions, discussions, or trading are frequently convened by local chiefs for their spiritual discernment and wisdom. Six, funerals and weddings are a powerful and poignant communal events. They serve not only as cultural occasion, but also as spiritual spaces where ministry occurs through prayers, testimonies, scripture readings, and other forms of community support and encouragement that affirm Christ's presence with us during life's transitions. This is what we are referring as Christ's woven ministry. This is not a secondary activity, it is a ministry. As one friend elder from one of our divisions in Lugari divisions in Lugari meeting in Kakamega County shared, our gospel is not hidden in books or behind church walls. It is in our greetings, in our walking together, in how we bury our dead and bless our marriages. Christ walks with us there. That's a Christ-woven ministry. The third part is public ministry as communal and spirit-led. Communal discernment is essential to African Quaker public ministry. It is not individualistic, but rooted in the community's life. In the Luya culture and many parts of African decision-making is conducted by wazes wa kanisa, the church elders, who gather and pray for hours over a decision, inviting the Holy Spirit to guide through scripture, shared silence, and stories. Quaker-style corporate discernment naturally fits within an African context, where the communal wisdom is valued more than discernment of any single person. For example, when a young friend from Kaimosi feels called to become a peace worker or a peacemaker after times of tribal or clan violence, Her sense of calling is not declared on her own, but tested, confirmed, and affirmed by her local meeting. This allows a spirit-led ministry that is accountable and supported by the community. This represents a different model of public ministry than what is often seen from other practices, where it is usually linked to ordination, like theological training or a credential. The Friends community in Africa public ministry may involve midwives, teachers, farmers, singers, or peacemakers. It is not merely a role, but a way of life that proclaim Christ's love and justice. The fourth part is African Quaker public ministry contextual challenges. There are challenges for the African Quaker public ministry despite its vibrancy. The first challenge is colonial ecclesiastical structures and categories imported early by missionaries' efforts and continuing to restrict indigenous expressions, often discourage women's leadership despite African women's traditional roles as spiritual leaders and community mediators. Gender dynamics persist. Number two is gender dynamics persist with cultural patriarchy continuing despite Quaker affirmation of spiritual equality and women's leadership in ministry. Midwives, mothers' union, local mission groups, women's choir, etc., are taking lead in leading this, but we still have that challenge of the patriarchal leadership that persists within the communities within Africa. Two, resource constraints, where rural friends often serve in ministry without any salary in churches made of mud bricks and corrugated tin roofs, but driven by a calling to live and breathe mission as a way of life in their villages and beyond. They strive to speak to the community. Internal theological evangelical and Africa. However, a theological humility makes fellowship across differences possible, grounded in shared values such as Christ as authority, peace, and communal faithfulness. And the last part is African Quaker ministry, the indigenous practice and incarnational models. In many regions, African Quaker ministries are drawn on indigenous practices reinterpreted in Christ. For example, storytelling is used in youth discipleship and programming to pass on moral values and biblical truth, as well as African parables and proverbs. Naming ceremonies are an occasional form of friends to bless a new child with words, songs, and testimony. Healing and health ministry that reflects African holistic undertakings of health as well as biblical principles of prayer and anointing. Singing and dancing in worship are not merely entertainment, but serve as theological exaltation or lament, culturally embedded in communal praise. These practices embody an incarnational vision of ministry where Christ takes form within local African culture, just as the Apostle Paul became all things to all people for the gospel. So too, to do African Friends allow Christ to take shape in the beauty of African life. The global invitation here is learning from African Quakerism. The presentation here I'm presenting invites Quaker theological community to explore the African context and experiences. What might global friends gain from a vision of public ministry that is one, integrated, where daily life is sacred and ministry takes place in the fields, the farms, in the kitchen, as much as in the church. Communal, where discernment is done corporately and rooted in mutuality and accountability. Christ woven, where Christ is not abstract, but encountered in touch, word, and physical presence. African Friends, amidst a world of division, spiritual desolation, ecological collapse, and rising materialism and a moral uncertainty, exemplify a faith that is relevant, embodied, and good news. They remind us that public ministry is not a literal, is not a title or office, but a way of life. A Christ-woven ministry for our time. Reimagining Quaker public ministry in the African context. A Christ-woven witness is an original theological work that reflects on the experience and witnesses of friends in Africa, grounded in the spiritual and material realities of the African soil. It offers a portrait of African Quakerism, an expression among the Luyas in Western Kenya, but also highlight broader themes in African Quaker public ministry as incarnational, prophetic, and joyfully communal. This work, therefore, offers not just a unique African vision of public ministry, but a gift to the global Quaker family. As we listen to this, may we listen to one another across our context and allow the threads of Christ's love woven among African friends witness to reweave a renewed vision of faith, public ministry to our world today. And that's what I'm offering to our friends at this particular point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Really appreciate that in-depth window into what public ministry looks like among friends in Kenya, and appreciate how you're talking about public ministry as an everyday occurrence, something that just letting our life speak. And I think this connects to Friends' tradition of we got rid of the specific sacraments, but that means our lives are the sacraments, right? And so appreciate your bringing that in and showing some of the things that Friends in Kenya do kind of naturally as part of the culture. So I would love to hear more about just a little glimpse of what does when I guess you're explaining this kind of communal aspect of Quaker public ministry, as well as the individuals have to live that, of course. So so it sounds like within the Kenyan context, it's more natural than maybe some Western contexts to do discernment communally, to do public ministry communally. So can you share just a little bit more about what that looks like, how you do kind of public ministry that kind of brings together the community discernment aspect as well as the individual doing the ministering.
Thank you. I think it is into the time I used for Christ woven ministry. The Christ woven ministry is drawing all, in other words, those ministers, those who have theologically been trained to be pastors and ministers in various churches, for those who are ministered to in the churches as members of the Quaker community, and the spirit of the inward light in each one of us calls to all of us to respond to that public ministry as a way of life. In other words, you have responded to the theology of Quaker, the inward life tells you to do and live the life of the Quaker testimonies in your daily operations, wherever you work, whatever you do, whatever you are doing in your professional ministry, in your profession, whatever is life is interwoven. You have to, we have to bring to culturally bring into weave into what we do our ministry and approach especially the Quaker testimony is living alive. And I like what we talked about, even Rufus talked about the element of the Quakerism is not just a dogma, but is a way of life. And therefore, from the African perspective, we live that life. It is not left to the few who are trained as pastors. The pastors are trained to lead people to understand the truth of how things are done. And those who are being trained to be discipled, they continue carrying out and living the public ministry. And therefore, public ministry becomes to all who have accepted and drawn into the spirit of being Quakers. And if you have now gone into, accepted to be a Quaker and gone through the process of understanding your inward light, you live a communal life, and everybody is you are accountable to the way you live, to the people, and how you do your work in the community, and how people look at you, and how the accountability is done, and it is living. So it is, that is part of life. We just make it, that's the way we live. There is nothing else you can actually do that can transform everything. Education comes in to shape and reorganize it so that it is not a disorderly process. And that's why the theological training helps reorganize and shape the ministry of public ministry that is done in a very organized and looking at not in a confused approach, but to a praise that can be done. And those are the people who lead the people through the discipleship training, through the educational process within the churches, through their preachings, and then leading, letting the members continue carry on the work as they have been called to do.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And I think we all hope that our communities are working together to listen to the Spirit and live that out in our daily lives. So appreciate hearing what that looks like in the Kenyan context. We're going to next hear from Myron Guachalla Montano, and his paper is called Can We Stop the Decrease in Attendance in Quakerism? Research on the United States Midwest, or something along those lines as a topic. And so Myron, please share with us.
Good morning, friends. I'm gonna share my screen. I have a presentation here. So, one of the first quotes that I have here that astounded me is 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week. This is done by Liston Pope, and when I got into the United States, that was pretty evident. Back in Bolivia, I'm not used to like have church church for Aymara or church, Aymaran church, and then like Spanish church, Quechua church, and whereas in the US, I encountered that, which was a difference. Um, the Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education uh, explains a bit. Well, this is aimed for um, access to education with with people from disabilities, but I think it's very applicable for to get access to worship in a church. So it defines what exclusion, segregation, integration, and inclusion is to them. I think very much this applies to the church. And what I've seen, if you see the segregation definition, I think that that's a bit what is happening in the US with different ethnicity churches. And then from there I started to get into why is this? How did it started? Why? And I've got two examples of how the African American church started with the first black pastor, people like Andrew Bryan and Richard Allen, who were like the kind of first African American pastors in the U.S. And at their time, it was because they were not fully accepted as they were like bringing all that they are into a main Protestant church at that time. And they went through this whole process of discrimination until they got to be to lead a different ethnicity church where they would be accepted um, with, from who they are. Quakers are, I think, there was a distinction at that time, but we still had what it was called the bench for colored persons. We can see this in the letter from Sarah Grimke to Sarah Douglas. So Quakers certainly allowed African Americans into the church, but just there was a dedicated bench for them. And now we've got into 1900s where there was a lot of Latin migration, Latin American migration, and with them there were believers, Christian believers that got into the United States, emigrated, and it started with the Azusa Street Revival, one of the early Hispanic churches, where the Iglesia Latina Pentecostal, and so one of on Arlene Sanchez Wash on Latino Pentecostal Identity says that at that time becoming Christian became equated with, and in some sense still means, becoming American. So there's a dominant culture that and when I read that, that really took me to early missionaries in Bolivia, where you were meant to dress in a certain way, you are meant to sing worship songs in a certain style, and that is what is to be Christian. Not to diminish what missionaries were doing at that time. I'm talking about 1930s, but that's what it was. And evangelicals whose many luminaries attending the best seminaries saw Pentecostals as poor, misguided country cousins who let their emotions get the best of them. So I also see that similarity, that there is a kind of quote unquote upper class church, and then there is the rest of the minor ethnicity, like down class churches. People at that time also saw the Pentecostals as poor, misguided country cousins, according to Arlene Sanchez Wash. And segregation, to me, is not only about ethnicity. Emerson Christian Smith on the book Divided by Faith says social relations tend to form between people of similar socio-demographic characteristics, and this is known as the homophily principle. Also in the same book, it says because religious groups recruit adherents through the networks of its members, the homophily principle suggests that homogeneous groups remain homogeneous. So there is there could be segregation among class. There could be segregation including age, and the segregation is separation, which leads me to a research that was done on Western Yearly Meeting. And one of the comments that I saw was really interesting is that intergenerational friendships are not the social norm. And this research was done on young adults in Western Yearly Meeting. But for young adults to feel genuinely supported in their meetings, they need true friendships for them. Moreover, small community of folks who know each other deeply might be our strength as Quakers. The trick is that in order to do cross-generational friendships with our young adults, we must pursue genuine curiosity, develop skills for friendship building, and pursue this with intention and willingness to grow. So when everybody is in their own quote unquote bench, there's no space for true friendships and true relationships. Everybody is on their comfort zone in their homogeneous groups, which, as Quakers, that diminish the people that we can accept in the church, and it becomes like a kind of closed space, not letting everyone really coming into that space. So what does this have to do with a revival? I think most of our Quaker churches are struggling with having young people in their meeting. And Caleb Craig from the Church of the Brethren, in his article Desegregating the Body of Christ, says younger generations are the most diverse in nation history as a practical and missional imperative. Younger generations are the most diverse, and there are believers in people migrating to this country, and and as a church, we need to be aware of that. The decline on attendance with with Quakers is very evident, and if we don't do something, if we are not attentive to the newer generations that are the most diverse than ever, we have two options. And this is what Arlene Beth Bauer says. Sustain the current pattern of functioning to the point of non-existence. Example, social system suicide, the disappearing of Quakers, or make an intentional decision to do things differently. Oftentimes, organization would rather die than change. In Western Yearly Meeting, in 1969, there used to be 11,000 members, and now in 2018, it is only 2,000. So this is what I'm proposing. Admit there is a problem, first of all, and then go through a process of grief, because there are factors why people we are decreasing numbers of churches. I think in the Midwest there was a big just as an example, there was a big split where a lot of people were hurt, and so it is really something that we need to look on and grieve on it, assume collective responsibility, get all together and energize a new future, getting ourselves out there and be vulnerable, which it takes courage to be vulnerable and getting ourselves out there. And now some ways to do this is through biblical hospitality, that, whatever you bring is whatever you are, and that you are welcome in our church. How does it mean to be welcoming in our church? Being intentional, affirm diversity and redistribution of power, and having tell stories, share about your life. I know that here in the US it's not that common to be open about your personal stories, but in countries like Latin America, in places like Latin America, we share more deeply things. So just to wrap things up, are we called to serve? Every newcomer needs to be treated as a potential friend. And be aware of the power dynamics. Invite people not just into the building, but into your family. And get get staff to outreach. I think people have lots of things to do, but there's a limit of outreach that we can do on a voluntary basis. And have a safe place to bring people to a church, because if you bring people into the church or into a meeting, you're welcome, please join us, and then exclude them for everything, that's gonna be a problem.
Thank you so much, Myron. Really appreciate your work on this, and I think you bring a really amazing and valuable perspective as coming from Bolivia and knowing what it was like to experience Quakerism there, knowing the heritage of the mission work and how that's impacted the community of friends there, and then coming to the United States probably with some expectations, and maybe those weren't quite met. So I know you shared with Christy and myself by email a little bit about your experience and what prompted this research about like how might we work toward desegregating and reviving friends meetings and churches in the Midwest. So could you share a little bit of that background of your own experience, your expectations, and what you experienced coming to United States Friends?
Sure. So first of all, it's like when the biggest difference is when somebody goes into a church, into my church in Bolivia, for example, there would be like, oh, so nice to meet you, and get to know that person more. And if someone from the States, for example, a foreigner would come into the church, we would be so thrilled, invite him here and there, have lunches, trying to engage. Um, my experience in the United States was a bit different. I have some, I don't know why was this, but I didn't get that much connection. I really saw a multicultural church in the United States where there was a similar dynamic as where I was in Bolivia. And the church is still thriving. It's a multicultural church. They have services in there are services in Spanish, Swahili, and English with headsets. They have a multi-generational cohort of believers. So I thought, well, maybe it's not just a cultural thing. And I dig deeper into this, and that's where I was called to do this research.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate that perspective and your experience noticing this dynamic. And so you were in a multicultural church that was not Quaker, right? And so you knew that that can exist in the U.S. That is a more welcoming and inclusive space. And so encouraging friends to work on that a little bit is really important. Maybe not a little bit, maybe a lot, right? So thank you for bringing that to us and for sharing your research and experiences. And finally, we will hear from Wendy Cooler. And Wendy is going to share on the topic of speculations for the future of public ministry, Quaker experiments, and the wider church. So, Wendy, thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you, Charisse. Can everyone see my slideshow? All right, great. Um, so I want to start by saying that what I have brought for us today, while I start my timer, what I have brought for us today is a message of sort of love among the ruins of the church in which we inhabit today. Um, if you've ever seen me present, you're probably expecting this. This presentation will touch on some difficult topics and occasionally use some difficult language. Um, and this is fundamentally a message of hope and reconciliation in our world. And oops. um, so I think that my remarks are in large part a kind of summation of what we have heard these past 2 days. Yesterday's presentation on the history of public ministry began with Steve Angel really affirming that early Quakers were public ministers. They were all ministers and they were in public, often doing dramatic acts of disobedience and being punished in very dramatic and sometimes fatal ways. Um, and we also heard about the founder of evangelical Quakerism from a non-Quaker. So Joseph John Gurney, the founder of evangelical Quakerism, really approached ministry in a different way, but in a way that a different way than it had been previously in Quaker community, but also in a different way than the evangelical church that he wanted to reconcile with as a Quaker, the broader church he wanted to reconcile. and take us into community with other Christians. And he felt that, any kind of public ministry, a call from God, needed to be tested by its fruits. And he combined an interest in biblical literacy with the sort of traditional values of experiencing God ourselves and in community. Um, and we also heard today about how, like in Ashley's experience of developing a new recording process, that one of the second readers was a Methodist who indicated some jealousy over our processes of discernment. I might want to disabuse that person of their inclination to jealousy, having been myself a public minister for 14 years now. Um, and we heard from John about how public ministry is very congruent with traditional African theologies, that Quakerism really presents an opportunity on the African continent because of this thing we have in common where God is present in our relationships, that Christ is woven in to everything we do. And just now from Myron, we were hearing that Christianity is really powerful. The beginning of sort of the segregated hour on Sunday was a decision that was made so that people of color could be powerful together. And so there's this tension that I see in the testimony today and in my experience of Quakerism and the church between, what is powerful and what is calling to us and the ways in which we want to protect ourselves and sort of compartmentalize ministry. And you see in Quakerism today a desire to move away from the belief that we are all ministers in each other's lives, at least in liberal Quakerism, the tradition from which I come. And you see a movement towards professionalization of ministry or a reaction against the professionalization of ministry, that it has become connected to, professional clergy and a seminary education. And I advocate a seminary education. I have a quite good seminary education. I have a Doctor of Ministry recently, and my master's is from Earlham School of Religion. It was, life-changing for me as spiritual formation, as it is for a lot of people. But that is the expectation, that people coming into our meetings, having deconstructed or becoming ex-evangelicals, if you know that phrase, they're departing their churches that they originally found membership in and finding us and want nothing to do. They have spiritual trauma. They want nothing to do with clergy. And so talking about public ministry creates tension inside of our meetings. And I would say in my emergent relationships with pastored meetings, there is some tension there as well in Quaker circles, especially as you can see from this Lifeway graph. Overall in the United States, we are just not having it with professional clergy anymore. Um, and I have a quote from someone who has participated in our programming up here at the Friends Incubator for Public Ministry. And this is pretty typical for us. We're seeing, despite this tension, I'm going to read a quote that exemplifies, with some bad language, the experience that some of our public ministers have had previous to this sort of dawning age of activism. This conference being an example of sort of the dawning of activism and resurgence of interest and acceptance of public ministry to reconcile us to each other in our call as ministers. During my doctoral research, I think in 2022, I interviewed 38 friends who were engaged in public ministry. And here is what someone said about their experience of being a very public friend. If I was snorting coke off the breasts of sex workers, that would be criticized. But so would opening the meeting house every week. Um, so in 2022, and that was a pretty typical quote of some saucy language, but pretty typical feeling of the friends that I interviewed for my doctoral research on the experience of public ministers who are making tremendous personal sacrifices to do the work of reconciliation. And I was seeing that, ironically, people that are called to the work of reconciliation often leave their meetings and lose their faith in our meetings and become isolated. And we've kind of become a community unto ourselves. But here we are, affirming and empowering ministry, people believing for the first time that they could be public ministers as they engage in the broader community in this work through the experiments of the incubator and other experiments in the world right now. And so I have very little time left. So I'm going to move on to hope. And as the world breaks, and as Myron was saying, as we grieve, as we just let ourselves get into the grief of breaking and change is really hard, y'all. It's really hard. But when we give into that and we grieve communally, we're finding the Spirit moving in ways that we didn't expect. And so, what we have here as Quakers is this precious idea of public ministry that is completely unlike the rest of the church, where we're seeing, people just mass exiting their churches of origin, and sometimes finding their way to us. We have this precious, precious gift, this precious fire that we're blowing oxygen on for the first time in a few decades. As we heard yesterday, it's deeply grounded in our history. For 350 years, we had public ministers, and suddenly, in the last 50 years, these practices, like recording practices, support practices, have been forgotten. And what's really different about us is that when we do advocacy, it's not just about a cause, it's because God is alive inside of us. It's very different than secular activism. And this discernment we're talking about, this is also called laboring. This is negotiation. This is about reconciliation at its root. So, in terms of structures, I would really invite us to think creatively inside of our own contexts about these gardens that we are building together. This is not a food forest. This is a picture I found. But it does have some food in it. But I want to imagine us, as sort of creating a food forest for each other, a spiritual forest inside of our communities of belonging. And we have wisdom that we can tap. Ashley was talking about, having this 150-page document built of the wisdom that is there for us to find. And I want to encourage us, and the Friends Incubator has with some success that I can talk about. This is not, a plug for the Friends Incubator, so I want to stay away from that. But I can talk about our experience more in questions if you're interested. But we're seeing that when we really dig deep into what is real inside of our communities, we can find the wisdom to build structures that are not about building technocratic, bureaucratic processes inside of our meetings, which, as in the United States, as largely middle class people, we tend to want to go to. But as we see in the broader church, that is a dead end street. That spirit led ministry that is supported and held in the community is really the future for us. And it's the future for us because we have this concept of right relationship. And you hear it being used in the broader culture now. But it really, I think, is from the 18th century, the work of John Woolman, the great abolitionist, who talked about making tremendous sacrifices in pursuit of being in a relationship that is spirit-led with the world. And today, we see writers like Pamela Haynes from Philadelphia Yearly Meeting using this concept of right relationship to talk about power dynamics. And we have this to offer the world, and this is the tradition that our public ministry is grounded in fundamentally, this repair work that is necessary to our getting to right relationship. So I'm over time. And so I want to say, in summation, this drawing or this piece of art is poppies cutting down a tall poppy. You might be familiar with the work of Marty Grundy and her Pendle Hill pamphlet from a few decades ago, where she talks about the Quaker desire to cut down anyone who stands out. Basically, to have beautiful manicured middle class lawns inside of our meetings. But we've heard the past 2 days that doesn't work. We can see it doesn't work in the broader church. And we can also see that there is tension inbred within us between this desire to move to the status quo in Quakerism and our foundational concepts. Like an individual Quaker is a friend. A friend cannot be a friend without being in relationship to someone else. Everything is about relationship. And our testimonies are public expressions of those. Our continuing revelation is our ongoing revelation, our ongoing relationship with the divine that provides guidance through our relationships with each other. So, if everyone is a minister, which I thoroughly believe, and some of us are called into public ministry, how can we make both of these things a reality inside of our meetings? Ministry is exciting. It's exciting to be called by God into deeper relationship with each other as an expression of our faith. Um, so, the central concerns of most public ministers that we've talked to, both in my doctoral work and in the context of the Friends Incubator, is about this way in which spiritual and material support is discouraging ministry. We don't need to be encouraged to do the ministry. People often go into debt. People sometimes don't get medical care that they need as a result of not having material support, and yet they still do the ministry they're called to until they absolutely cannot anymore. So I want us to think about not compensation like we would in the secular world. I don't personally need to be compensated to act out my call from God, but I do need to survive it. And I think that I would really encourage us all to think creatively about how we do that in our communities of belonging as an affirmation of life, as a way of revitalizing our meetings and fulfilling the vision of Joseph John Gurney, actually, and rejoining that church that we left in horror and trauma in the 17th century and rejoining the world as whole people alive with spirit.
Thank you very much, Wendy. That's a great call and challenge of being able to be our unique Quaker selves as a community and as individuals, as well as to be connected to the broader body of the church and figure out how to do that in ways that are life-giving. So appreciate that call and that invitation. And that connects with one of the questions that came in. You mentioned the ruins of the church and wondering how this connects with the ruins of empire and the way that we have maybe the church has been shaped like the empire a little too much. And so So as we're thinking about, you mentioned how in the past we have supported ministers better, maybe, or at least had structures for recording and for supporting ministers. But maybe some of this is being broken because we recognize it has been too connected to kind of imperial shaped structures. So would you talk about a little bit about that dynamic of uh, reforming in a way that doesn't have that connection as badly?
Yeah. Well, another thing that people will know about me if they know me is that I am not a purity-oriented person. And so I think that empire is going to be with us. And I think that the way to confront empire is to acknowledge empire. Um, and I think that I often say adults do not have innocence, and I do not respect claims of adult innocence. As a result of that, that is what children have. Adults have wisdom. And then there's something grimy about wisdom. There's something hard earned about wisdom. There's something about wisdom that limps. Um, and I think showing up in all of our baggage, limping to each other into each other's arms, is how we confront empire. Um, we can't avoid it. It's a part of us.
Thank you. And appreciate you sharing that. And I'm going to uh, add all of the panelists here so we can have more of a conversation. And wondering, first of all, before we go to some of the good questions that we have received, if any of you have any questions for each other, or whether it's a question for one of you specifically or for the panel in general. So start with you all. Do you have any questions for each other?
Well, I want to say, Myron, I really appreciated the way you were talking about sharing ourselves vulnerably, and the difference between the cultures that you have found between, Bolivia and, where you are in the Midwest. I'm an American Southerner, so I'm very in touch with my feelings. I come from a different culture of origin than where you are geographically. And I'm really interested in any thoughts you might have about how we share fully and completely with each other while respecting the need that our conversation partners have to not be overwhelmed by us.
So, yes, I think there there needs to be first some grounding and some relationship building with people. I think we are what my experience in the US and again it's in yes in the Midwest it's like where everything is just so productivity focused, and even in meetings like you go to worship and that's it, or like you want to share worship sharing, we just go straight into worship sharing, with so for example what I am trying to help facilitate here is to have special interest groups. Let's have board games, let's laugh together, let's have a meal, let's have um in that kind of let's have in Bolivia we used to have a lunch every Sunday. I know that that is like too much to do like right now, but in those kind of things, I don't I believe that the more smooth we can relax and dismantle like uh, um, dismantle like social barriers between ourselves, the more we can share with each other and have fellowship and encounter middle ground. Sometimes everything, my experience is in the US that everything is just so divided. There's no middle ground. Either you are from this party or you're from the other party, or you, if you believe this, it's like there's a box for everyone, and sometimes people are don't fit in those boxes. And understanding that comes from really, you know, interacting with each other, in my view.
I want to follow up on Wendy Kula. Yeah, and your last concerns and questions you posed up onto how ministry, the challenges of public ministry, where it's becoming challenging to do public ministry, where you can't depend on public ministry on support systems, and you find it challenging to ensure that it is effectively done. What I don't know is that looking at the dynamics of life today and looking at how busy people are in our normal life of living, everybody is trying to make a living, everybody's trying to do something in order to survive. Uh, don't you look, how do you look at the public ministry not being confined to specific people who want to do public ministry, but a public ministry being done by all who are called, I believe, for those who have come and accepted to be within the Quaker Community Fellowship, all embraces the spirit of Quaker spirit of doing the same ministry. Can that discipling be done among those people who are in different vocations, that each can pick up how they can reach, how they can do their public ministry vis-a-vis their vocation, such that I'm a teacher, but my public ministry is in how to engage socially with other teachers in my school. In a way, we can look at some peace programs, something else, some social work, some Gandhi community and engaging all other. Will that be something that can be approached rather than being a minister looking for services, being for payments, but you are getting an income, but you can still do this public ministry depending on what you do, just like the Paul ministry. I don't know how it can work from the American side. From the African side, that is possible, but I don't know the cultural perspective from the American side, how it would be like.
Yeah, I think this is a really good question, John. And it really dovetails with what Charisse was asking about empire. So I don't think we can avoid empire. And I think that, having a vocational choice that we do because we need to survive, I think is a part of empire's economy. Um, and I think that what Quakers have in front of us with our tradition of public ministry and supporting each other, realizing that we have bodies and families, in addition to a call from spirit, is a way of breaking empire that we could work together to radically reimagine how we are in relationship with the economy and in relationship to each other. And I think that out of necessity, yes, um, we can make vocational choices that are not, full-time public ministry or in the United States, there's a movement in seminary education towards something called bivocational ministry, which means you have a job, preferably a not very demanding job, and then you also have this vocational call to ministry. Um, and there are ways of saying that, your job is your ministry. I think that there are a lot of employees at Quaker institutions, for instance, and their job is their ministry. I think that scholars who work at ESR, for instance, are very much public ministers. People that work at Fringe Journal are public ministers. And people who perhaps don't work in a Quaker context at all, but are teachers and counselors, they can go about this work in a way that it is ministry, even though I wouldn't say it automatically is. I think motivation matters, where it's coming from matters, and discernment matters. And so I think that if we were to open ourselves up and make ourselves fully vulnerable, which I speculate we are in the process of doing right now, I feel so much less tension inside my own meeting. For instance, to go back to the experiment that is the Friends Incubator, it is not a standalone nonprofit. It is under the fiscal sponsorship and care of my meeting. It is very much a grassroots thing, and not something that intends to exist for a long time, does not have a sort of centralized power structure as if any power is there. But there is real strength there as we come together. And I think that this is really the promise of public ministry generally is yes, we might make choices today that are not ideal. We might not make them in 10 years because we are building a different world and the choices you're laying out are perfectly valid under the circumstances. And we might have a goal of transforming our world. And our public ministry as friends internationally might be to confront empire.
Thank you all, and really appreciate that conversation among you and how your pieces of the work of paying attention to Quakerism in your part of the world are really fitting together and offering us a broader perspective. There's sort of a theme that is coming up from a lot of the questions that we've received because it seemed like there, interestingly, in your presentations, there was this idea from Ashley's of like maybe some Quakers aren't even like thinking it's okay to celebrate when we record a minister, um, all the way to the other side of like celebration and singing and dancing in worship is an integral part, and also like John shared in the streets, singing music in the marketplace. Those are kind of different expressions of Quakerism and parts of our cultures. So I'm wondering just if you all would address sort of this question of like different cultures express how to be a Quaker and how to be ministering in public from their own cultural perspective, and also maybe some of the more reserved ways that white friends have traditionally kind of not celebrated and not had been publicly expressive, um, maybe hold us back in some ways. So just your thoughts on those types of concerns and considerations and differences among friends cultures. Anybody want to take that first? Go ahead, Myron.
Um, well, I think as I explained as I said before, what you bring is what you are. Most of the um, mm, a lot of Quaker signs, it says all are welcome, and but sometimes it is found that there is this dominant culture, um, and that is the challenge. How to people who have been in meetings longer for 30, 40 years can give up that privilege for newcomers. I think, or ordinarily and typically, you go in, and the more you build trust, you go up into the hierarchy. But in Quakers, in Christ, I think it's the other way around, where where you start going to meeting and you are like, you should be treated, as someone as someone who you haven't, a family member who you haven't seen in quite a long time. So when those cultures interact in the same church, there should be a balance and recognizing, um, because I've heard from some friends where someone starts to sing in silent worship, or singing something more movie. It kind of it's a culture shock. But the more we can dismantle and and have a safe space for everyone. I mean, I was talking. Sorry if I'm taking too long. I was talking this with a friend. Like, there is like a meeting for friends of color, and yes, there is a need for a safe space, but also, like, ideally, in my ideal world, every space should be a safe space. And I think we need to, now the new Quakers need to impact in making every meeting a safe space for everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Myron. We lost John, I think. But I guess that means it's my turn. So I will I want to share an anecdote from our experience at the incubator. So the incubator is administering so the question is about, how public ministry kind of shows up in our context. Um, and we have this fellowship we're administering, and we're going to announce the fellows on Monday. We have chosen them. So we have, 5 people from 5 different yearly meetings and 5 monthly meetings that are also fellows of this program. Um, and the program is a kind of intervention with meetings to help them become strong leaders in their context, and be able to teach other meetings how to support and hold public ministry accountable, and become stronger in their discernment work. Um, and the reason this is an answer to your question, Charisse, is that the way public ministry is showing up, and we did almost 60 interviews to get to these 5 folks. The way that public ministry showed up in almost all of those, 60 interviews as we were selecting our fellows, is as healing work. And it had different modalities. There were writers, there were performance artists, there were facilitators, there were people doing what looked like, traditional pastoral care, there were storytellers. And what I think we were seeing in those interviews is a true message. When you hear a message twice in 2 different locations, you might think, oh, this is a true message. Um, and the message we're getting is it is time for us to take healing seriously inside of our community, and we are the ones to facilitate the healing that the world needs. It's time for us to take responsibility. And I think that public ministry is fundamentally about taking responsibility for healing our world. And that's the way it's showing up right now.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of healing that needs to be done on so many different levels, and important for friends to be a part of that. So thank you. John, I'm glad you could rejoin us, and wanted to ask you a question that came in. Uh, so the problem of patriarchy disempowering women's spiritual leadership is global, so it's not just limited to your own context, but are there ways that the African Quaker women are maybe using innovative or subversive means to break through the barriers to their Christ-woven public ministry? So what does Quaker public ministry look like for women in the Kenyan context right now?
Thank you. That patriarchal issue is still existing, but I would say and strongly and confidently say that the public ministry is strongly exercised by women in Africa. Most ministries are women are open to sharing, are open into peacemaking, are open into community building, are open into various areas, even where men are dominantly engaged in certain community rights. There is a place for women. They take up their responsibility in carrying out. For instance, we have a movement in Kenya called the United Society of Friends Women. This is a powerful public ministry of women who gathers sometimes every after 3 months in thousands and thousands from across the whole country, coming together, praying and sharing concerns of the country, the churches, the families, the issues that are going on. Women in Kenya or in Africa, or in Tanzania and in Uganda, Rwanda and Burundi are on the front line and more effectively engaged in public ministry than men. As much as they are living in such a society, the Quaker women have taken a lead of which men cannot challenge. And that is a credit, I could say. The Quaker women in this area where I come from, they are leading from the front. And even as I speak, I say I'm engaged in public ministry. I cannot challenge the women. They are there doing that. And we have quite a good number who have engaged in theologically engaged in training, and those who have not even theologically, but they have spiritually filled and called to the ministry of public ministry. And that is one thing that I could say it goes beyond a question within the African context. Thank you.
That's great to hear about that vibrancy and the power that the women have in their spiritual leadership. So thank you for sharing about that. That's exciting. Myron, you shared a little bit about power dynamics in friends communities that you've been engaged with in the Midwest. Could you give us a little bit more information about how you think power dynamics need to be involved, acknowledged, and how that acknowledgement of power dynamics helps overcome disparities in cross-cultural ministry? Does this specifically relate to money? Are there other things involved that, from your perspective?
I think it's also, yes, I think it involves wealth, but also involves how, for example, there's the term the weighty friends, um, and recognizing that your voice is quite prominent in the meeting. It's, that it's quite important when a newcomer, for example, if I wa if all there's a book called Widening the Welcome of Your Church, which it's like an examination of what are these power dynamics like? Can Are people, well, I'm just throwing examples out there. It's These are not examples because it's not a book written for Quakers. But for example, things like, if someone stands up and dance in the middle of silent worship, are friends gonna be comfortable with that? If that's their what the spirit is calling them to do, is how is the process to use spaces in the Quaker meeting? Do I just send an email to everyone, or just the cleric, and the cleric says, "Oh, sure," or is it like a 4-month process of discerning to use that space for to have a coffee, you know? How easy how how easy is to bring a new perspective into the meeting, I would say. Um, and so acknowledging that is and acknowledging that, how easy is for some friends to do that. If I'm the clerk in 4 committees, or if I am and I can make things expedite, that's like, I have a bit of power there, as opposed to someone who wants to do something, who is not the clerk, or who is not involved in these 4 or 5 committees, right? So, um, and then how you within you, because as Wendy said, like, there some well, when Wendy said, talked about the empire, that immediately comes to my mind. Well, yeah, we are used to have, like, certain power and dynamics. So how is it that I can give up this power to ensure that the new person is really the one who I can facilitate initiatives from that person, and not just in the organizational level, but also, like, on the human level. How do I engage with people? If I stand up in ministry saying that I've gone through this, that I dragged from my 3 doctoral studies, and someone from a working class comes into the meeting, or if I greet someone saying, and the only thing that I'm interested is in their education, it's a thing that we need to acknowledge, how how we engage within this power that we acquire by time in our meetings.
Thank you. Yeah, so really kind of um, turning on its head, as Jesus called us to in the Bible, those hierarchies that are ingrained in our culture, and instead welcoming and being really excited when new people come, instead of giving all the attention to the weighty friends. And yeah, and weighty friends can model that, as you said. So I really appreciate that. And Wendy, final question to you that kind of goes along the lines of what you were saying at the end of when you last were talking. What do you mean by a ministry of reconciliation? What kind of reconciliation, and what kind of harm or harms are being addressed?
Oh, Charisse, I have 2 minutes to answer that question. That was a tiny one. Um, so, there are many harms being addressed by public ministers, both sort of inside of the incubator context and outside of it. I had a ministry around interpersonal violence. I was against it, for the record, for about 12 years. And that was really, you would think that Quakers in general would be against it, but we facilitate it quite often. Um, and so that was a very difficult series of interventions with people that I love in the Quaker world. And increasingly, I see other public ministries arising to address those concerns. And so I no longer felt that I was called to do that work. Because, like Myron was talking about, I took up a lot of space. I was like the interpersonal violence girl of Quakerism. And now there are dozens of people doing that work. Um, and so that is a real concern inside of our communities. It's very alive for me. But economic justice, well, these are also examples of addressing interpersonal violence, but economic injustice and racial injustice are very much things that are being addressed inside of our cohort of ministers in the fellowship program. We have someone who leads Meeting for Worship on public transportation and facilitates conversations between people of very different political persuasions to help people get out of their boxes, their little compartments, and actually talk about values and what is really deeply held and loved by us. Um, and so, there's a variety of ways in which we can perceive that our world is broken by empire. And I'm so glad you asked the question about empire because I wouldn't have phrased it this way otherwise, but this is what we're talking about. We're talking about confrontations with empire inside of ourselves and outside of ourselves. Um, and we are like we are the death doulas and we are the doulas for birth. A doula is an overused metaphor. But I think that, this is the work that we are called to do as meetings, as all of us ministers inside of our meetings, and those of us that are called to public facing ministers in some kind of full-time, all-encompassing manner. This is the work. And yeah, I can't even count all the ways in which our world needs to be healed, and we are the ones addressing those needs.
Thank you so much, Wendy, and thank you so much to all of you who are on
Hi,
our panel today.
hi.
Hi
This
there.
is I'm not Dalis, I'm Dinora Valle, but I would like to share something. I'm from La Iglesia Los Amigos Quakeros en Ritmo, and I'm from Mexico. Hi, Myron. Hola. Um, just quickly, I am from Mexico, from Ciudad Victoria, a church who has 154 years old. And I was listening to the experience from Africa, the women, the powerful ministry the women have. My church has survived most for women. We are evangelical church, a pastoral church, and with a pastor from years, probably 60, 70 years. And um, women are the one who kept the church alive and still. And I'm here now to study in ESR. I graduated in 1989, no, 1998. 1998. And now I'm part of the La Iglesia Los Amigos Cuáqueros, where Myron also is part. And one of the things in my experience for 30 years here in this area, being a Quaker, and I have experience, as a personal experience, going to different churches. Yeah. And the things I noticed that I think we had to work on, it's people, and it has to break the fear to the different, the other who was different. And when I said different, I say from race and language. You already talked about class, the different class, but it's not the same to a middle class or lower class white than somebody who's Latino or Black. And more if we are with some accent when we speak English, then people usually speak louder to us, like think we are not understand. And it's like, and others, they don't know what to do with us. They don't know how to interact with us. And I can understand, because we came from different culture. We are, I have been here for all this year, we have a different background. And even though the things that unite us is the faith in Quakers, the beliefs, it's hard to explain. You go and talk to people, and it's like they don't know what to talk to you about. So we have to force ourselves to interact with people. And don't take me wrong, I found amazing people, especially those who have been able to understand different cultures, but I think it's one thing that I say we or Quakers here, had to work more in culture and not to be, to be themselves when we encounter somebody with accent and just welcome, feel people welcome. And I think the Latino church that we are, thanks to La Pastora Dalis and a lot of people who are working on getting this, the support for West Richmond Church, I think had been a blessing for a lot of the Latino community here. And at the same time, we are trying to make a path to interact with the West Richmond, the American. And I think we are doing good and making the people to feel comfortable with us too. So I think it's good. So I really encourage people, if they can one point join or visit a church that is different, that will open the eyes and mind for other people.
Thank you so much for adding that word. Really appreciate it. And yeah, especially in the United States right now, in our cultural context where there is a lot of discrimination and fear around immigration, this is something that Friends can really do, is reach out to each other and build relationships across those differences that you're talking about, but not just right now, all the time. So thank you. So I will invite everyone to show their appreciation for these panelists if you would like to, through emojis on the screen. And thank you, Wendy, Myron, John, and Ashley, who had to leave earlier, for preparing and sharing with us your wisdom and your research and your experiences. And thank you to everyone for joining and asking excellent questions and listening and being a community together this morning. If we didn't get to your questions, we will be sharing all the questions that we received with the panelists so that they can think about those as they're hopefully working on incorporating these into papers. These presentations, many of them will become papers for Quaker religious thought for next year. So if you are interested in seeing these in print later on, please make sure that you subscribe to Quaker Religious Thought, and I will put that in the chat so that you can subscribe and you will get a copy of these papers when they come out next year. And so appreciate all of you who are who are uh, working on putting these words into writing in the coming year. So I will remove our panelists from being spotlighted and just make a mention that also if you would like to uh, be aware of when Quaker Theological Discussion Group meets next year and what the call for papers will be and when things are happening and stuff like that, make sure to go to qtdg.org, and there is a opportunity to follow the blog there. So if you put in your email address, you will receive updates whenever we put something out on the blog. That's usually our calls for papers and when our Quaker religious thought has been published and other information about QTDG sessions. So make sure you subscribe to that so that you get updates about what's going on in Quaker Theological Discussion Group and Quaker Religious Thought, and can know when our next call for papers comes out and everything. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye on the recording.